May I have your badge number and the name of your supervisor?
Excuse me?
Your badge number. I'm
I
entitled
need
to
backup at
request
pre-check lane 3. Non-compliant passenger, possibly hostile.
I'm not hostile. I
You
asked a
people
simple
always have
question.
questions. Always got something to say. Always making demands.
At 7:42 a.m., inside Charlotte Douglas International Airport, a white police officer approached a black woman standing in the TSA pre-check line and told her she was in the wrong place. The woman was wearing a tailored navy suit, carrying a leather briefcase, and holding credentials that identified her as a federal judge. Her name was Monique Johnson, 54 years old, appointed to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals by the President of the United States and confirmed by the Senate with bipartisan support. She had served on the federal bench for 9 years. The officer who stopped her, Darren Kovacs, 41, had spent 16 years with the Charlotte Airport Police Department. He had decided in the span of a single glance that she didn't belong, not in that line, not in that terminal, not anywhere near the expedited boarding lanes reserved for verified travelers. He didn't check her credentials, he didn't scan her identification, he looked at her skin color and made his judgment. What happened in the next 11 minutes was captured by 7 different security cameras positioned throughout the terminal concourse. Every word, every shove, every moment of escalation that would later be played in a federal courtroom, broadcast across national news, and viewed more than 50 million times online. What happened in those 11 minutes would trigger an FBI investigation, end multiple careers, send 3 officers to federal prison, and result in one of the largest civil rights settlements in airport police history. Officer Darren Kovacs had been with the Charlotte Airport Police Department since he was 25 years old. In that time, he had accumulated 31 formal complaints from travelers. 28 of those complaints involved black passengers. He had been accused of racial profiling, excessive force, unlawful detention, and verbal abuse more times than most officers receive complaints in an entire career. Not once had he faced a disciplinary hearing. Not once had he been suspended. Not once had any supervisor sat him down and told him his behavior was unacceptable. Instead, he had been promoted twice. Among his colleagues, Kovacs had earned a nickname. They called him the Gatekeeper. It wasn't a compliment from those who understood what it meant. He had made a habit of stationing himself near pre-check and priority boarding lanes, targeting black travelers for additional screening and questioning. He seemed to take personal satisfaction in making them prove they belonged. A black airline pilot in full uniform had been forced to produce 6 forms of identification before Kovacs would let him pass. A congressional aide traveling with a U.S. senator had been detained for 2 hours based on what Kovacs called suspicious behavior. She had been reading a book while waiting in line. Every complaint filed against him landed on the desk of Lieutenant Frank Ingram, his direct supervisor, and every complaint was dismissed. Insufficient evidence, conflicting accounts, no video available. The excuses varied, but the outcome never did. Kovacs walked away clean every single time, learning with each complaint that there would never be consequences for the way he treated people who looked like Monique Johnson. Judge Monique Johnson had spent her entire adult life in service to the law. She graduated from Harvard Law School at the top of her class, turned down offers from corporate firms paying 6 figures, and joined the U.S. Attorney's Office because she believed in justice. For 22 years, she prosecuted federal cases, organized crime, public corruption, civil rights violations. She sent dirty cops to prison. She dismantled trafficking rings. She stood in front of juries and spoke for victims who had no other voice. When the president nominated her to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, the Senate confirmed her 94-6. Republicans praised her fairness. Democrats praised her record. Legal scholars called her one of the most qualified judicial appointments in a generation. From the bench, she had issued landmark rulings on voting rights, police accountability, and equal protection under the law. Her opinions were cited in law school classrooms across the country. That morning, she was traveling to Washington, D.C. for an emergency hearing at the Supreme Court. A case involving federal sentencing guidelines required her presence, and she had booked the earliest flight out of Charlotte to make the 10 a.m. session. In her briefcase, she carried her federal judicial identification, her State Department travel clearance, and documentation granting her diplomatic courtesies at all U.S. ports of entry. She had credentials that could get her into secure facilities most Americans didn't know existed. She had chosen to travel without her usual security detail. It was a simple domestic flight, a routine trip she had made dozens of times before. She never imagined she would need protection inside an American airport. Kovacs stepped directly into Judge Johnson's path as she approached the pre-check entrance. His stance was wide, his hand resting on his belt, his expression already hostile. "Ma'am, this line is for verified travelers only," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "Regular screening is over there." Judge Johnson stopped. She had dealt with men like this before in courtrooms, in depositions, in federal facilities where defendants thought intimidation would work on her. It never did. She reached into her briefcase calmly and produced her credentials. "I'm a federal judge," she said, holding out her judicial identification and pre-check documentation. "These are my credentials." Kovacs barely glanced at them. He didn't take the ID. He didn't scan the barcode. He didn't examine the holographic seal or the photograph that clearly matched the woman standing before him. He looked at her face, then back at the credentials, and shook his head. "These are probably fake," he said. "You're going to need additional screening." Behind her, white travelers passed through the line without a second glance. A businessman in a rumpled suit. A woman with 2 children pulling roller bags. An elderly couple moving slowly toward the scanners. None of them were stopped. None of them were questioned. Kovacs' partner, Officer Neil Stanton, 29, stood a few feet away watching the interaction. He said nothing, did nothing. The security cameras recorded everything, including the fact that Kovacs never once scanned or verified her credentials before deciding she didn't belong. Kovacs pointed toward a roped-off area beside the security checkpoint. "Step out of line," he said. "Now." Judge Johnson complied. She stepped to the side without argument, without raising her voice, without giving him any reason to escalate. But before moving further, she asked a simple question. "May I have your badge number and the name of your supervisor?" Kovacs' expression darkened. He reached for his radio. "I need backup at pre-check lane 3. I've got a non-compliant passenger." Judge Johnson's voice remained steady. "I'm not being non-compliant. I'm asking for your identification, as is my right." Kovacs ignored her. He stepped closer, crowding her space, and pointed at the wall beside the screening area. "Hands on the wall. You're getting a pat-down." "On what grounds?" she asked. That was when he grabbed her. His hand closed around her upper arm with force that would leave bruises visible for weeks. He yanked her toward the wall and shoved her forward. Her briefcase slipped from her grip and hit the floor, clasps popping open, legal documents scattering across the tile. Travelers nearby gasped. Several pulled out phones and began recording. Kovacs leaned in close, his voice loud enough for the cameras to capture every word. "You people always think you're above the law." Judge Johnson turned her head slightly, her cheek pressed near the wall, her voice calm despite the grip on her arm. "Officer, I am the law. I'm a federal judge on the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals." Kovacs laughed. The sound was cruel, dismissive, dripping with contempt. "Sure you are," he said. "And I'm the Pope." Kovacs pulled his handcuffs from his belt. "You're being detained for disorderly conduct." Judge Johnson kept her hands visible, her posture compliant. "What specific conduct?" "I've followed every instruction. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't resisted." Kovacs didn't answer with words. He grabbed her right wrist and wrenched it behind her back with a violent twist. The motion was fast, brutal, and completely unnecessary. Judge Johnson cried out as her shoulder joint separated partially from its socket. The pain shot through her arm and into her chest. Before she could speak, Kovacs slammed her forward onto the metal screening table. Her face struck the surface hard, her glasses shattered on impact, a shard slicing into her cheek just below her left eye. Blood began running down her face immediately, bright red against the stainless steel surface, visible on every camera recording the scene. Kovacs forced her down and planted his knee into her upper back, pressing his full weight onto a 54-year-old woman with a dislocated shoulder and a bleeding face wound. I'm not resisting, Judge Johnson said through clenched teeth. You're injuring me. I need medical attention. Kovacs leaned down closer. Should have thought about that before you got uppity. His partner, Officer Stanton, finally stepped forward. Darren, maybe we should Kovacs cut him off without looking back. Shut up, Neil. I know how to handle these people. The cameras recorded everything. The blood on the table, the knee on her back, the words he chose, every second of it documented and preserved. A man in a gray suit pushed through the gathering crowd. He was 62 years old, tall, with the bearing of someone who had spent decades in positions of authority. His name was Colonel Samuel Okonjo, retired, former Judge Advocate General Attorney for the United States Army. He had prosecuted military crimes for 30 years. He knew excessive force when he saw it. "Officer, stop what you're doing immediately," Colonel Okonjo said, his voice cutting through the noise of the terminal. "That woman is injured and compliant. You have no legal basis for this level of force." Kovacs looked up, his knee still pressing into Judge Johnson's back. "Sir, step back, or you'll be arrested for interference with a police officer." Colonel Okonjo didn't move. Instead, he pulled out his phone already recording and dialed 911. His voice was calm, practiced, the voice of a man who had testified in hundreds of courtrooms. "I need to report an assault in progress at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, TSA pre-check area. The assault is being committed by an airport police officer against a restrained civilian. The victim is bleeding and requesting medical attention. Send emergency services immediately." Kovacs's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, a woman in a TSA supervisor uniform appeared. Denise Carrington had heard the commotion from across the checkpoint and pushed through the crowd. She took one look at the scene, the blood, the scattered documents, the federal judicial ID lying open on the floor, and her face went pale. "Officer," she said slowly, reaching for her radio, "do you know who this woman is?" Kovacs sneered. "I don't care if she's the Queen of England." Airport Police Chief Bernard Foley arrived 4 minutes later, slightly out of breath, his uniform still crisp, but his expression already tight with concern. He had received 3 calls in rapid succession, one from TSA, one from Airport Authority, and one from a city official who had seen a live video already circulating online. Denise Carrington intercepted him before he reached the scene. She leaned close and whispered a name. Chief Foley's face changed instantly. The color drained. His jaw went slack. He strode toward Kovacs with barely controlled urgency. "Remove the handcuffs," Foley said quietly. "Right now." Kovacs looked up, confused. "Chief, she was non-compliant. I have witnesses." "She. That's a federal appellate judge, you idiot." Foley's voice was low but sharp as a blade. "She sits on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. She was confirmed by the United States Senate. Remove the cuffs now." Kovacs' hands froze. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. He unlocked the handcuffs and stepped back. Judge Johnson slowly pushed herself upright, cradling her injured arm against her chest. Blood still dripped from the cut beneath her eye. Chief Foley softened his tone, attempting damage control. "Your Honor, let's get you somewhere private. Medical attention, whatever you need. I'm sure we can handle this internally without—" Judge Johnson turned to face him. Her voice was steady despite the pain. "Chief, I've spent 22 years prosecuting cover-ups. I know exactly what you're attempting right now." She glanced at the cameras overhead, then back at Foley. "And you're doing it on camera." Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. They found Judge Johnson sitting on a metal bench, her right arm hanging at an unnatural angle, blood drying on her cheek and jaw. The cut beneath her eye required 6 stitches. Her shoulder was confirmed as partially dislocated and would need to be reset at the hospital. She refused to leave. "I'm not going anywhere until I speak with the FBI," she said. The paramedics exchanged glances but didn't argue. The Charlotte FBI field office received a call at 8:14 a.m. 2 special agents were dispatched immediately and arrived at the terminal within 20 minutes. While they were en route, Chief Foley made another attempt at containment. He approached Colonel Okonjo and the other witnesses who had recorded the incident on their phones. "We're going to need to collect those devices as part of our investigation," Foley said. Colonel Okonjo didn't blink. "Confiscating witness recordings without a warrant is a federal offense, Chief. I'd advise you to step back." Foley retreated. From the back of the ambulance, Judge Johnson made a single phone call to the Chief Justice's office in Washington. She explained briefly what had happened. The emergency hearing she was scheduled to attend would have to be delayed. By 9 a.m., news alerts began appearing on phones across the country. Federal judge assaulted at Charlotte Airport. Appellate court judge bloodied by police. Kovacs was placed on administrative leave that morning, but witnesses later reported seeing him in the airport police break room less than an hour later, laughing with fellow officers. His initial incident report, filed at 10:47 a.m., claimed that Judge Johnson had become combative and refused lawful orders. The FBI subpoenaed Charlotte Douglas International Airport's security footage before noon. What they received was comprehensive and devastating. 7 different cameras had captured the incident from multiple angles. The footage showed Judge Johnson standing calmly in the pre-check line. It showed Kovacs approaching her unprompted. It showed her presenting credentials that he never examined. It showed her complying with every instruction, stepping out of line without protest, keeping her hands visible at all times. It showed Kovacs grabbing her arm, slamming her against the wall, throwing her onto the screening table, and driving his knee into her back while she bled onto the metal surface. The audio was equally damning. Every word Kovacs had spoken was captured with perfect clarity. "You people always think you're above the law. Should have thought about that before you got uppity. I know how to handle these people." His incident report was contradicted on every single point. Witness phone videos had already begun circulating online. Within 48 hours, the footage had been viewed more than 47 million times across multiple platforms. Comment sections filled with outrage. News networks played the clips on loop, but the most damaging evidence came from Kovacs's own body camera. He had reported that it malfunctioned during the incident, that no footage existed. FBI technicians recovered the recording from the department's cloud backup server. It showed Kovacs spotting Judge Johnson in line, turning to Officer Stanton, and saying with a smirk, "Watch me deal with this one." Within 1 week, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened a formal investigation into the Charlotte Airport Police Department. What they found went far beyond a single officer. FBI interviews with current and former employees revealed a culture of institutional racism that had been allowed to flourish for years. Kovacs, it turned out, had made a game of it. He and a small group of officers had an informal betting pool. They wagered on how many minority travelers each of them could redirect away from pre-check lanes during a single shift. The officer with the highest count at the end of the week collected the pot. Investigators recovered emails from Lieutenant Frank Ingram's department account showing that he was not only aware of the betting pool, he had participated in it, he had placed bets, he had collected winnings. He had laughed at jokes about which officers were leading the league. The 31 complaints previously filed against Kovacs were pulled from the archives and re-examined. This time, investigators actually contacted the complainants. 19 former victims came forward publicly. A black cardiothoracic surgeon had been detained for 4 hours in 2019 while traveling to a medical conference. A black woman married to a Fortune 500 CEO had been taken to a private room and strip-searched based on what Kovacs called reasonable suspicion. A black Olympic athlete had missed his flight to a qualifying event after Kovacs selected him for random additional screening. Internal Affairs had dismissed every single complaint without conducting substantive investigations. The entire airport police command structure, from sergeants to the chief himself, was implicated in a systemic cover-up that had protected Kovacs for 16 years. A federal grand jury convened 6 weeks after the assault. The indictments came down on a Thursday morning. Officer Darren Kovacs was charged with assault under color of law pursuant to 18 U.S.C. Section 242, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, filing false federal reports, and obstruction of justice. If convicted on all counts, he faced up to 20 years in federal prison. Lieutenant Frank Ingram was indicted as a co-conspirator. The charges against him included conspiracy to deprive civil rights, obstruction of justice, and failure to intervene in the commission of a federal crime. He had known what Kovacs was doing for years. He had protected him. He had participated in the betting pool that treated racial profiling as sport. Chief Bernard Foley was indicted separately for obstruction of justice and attempted cover-up. His actions at the scene, attempting to confiscate witness phones, offering to handle this internally, pressuring Judge Johnson not to escalate, were all captured on camera and constituted clear evidence of criminal intent. Officer Neil Stanton was granted immunity in exchange for his full cooperation and testimony. He sat before investigators and described what everyone in the department had known for years. "We all knew what Kovacs did," Stanton said. "We were told to look the other way. Anyone who complained got bad assignments, overnight shifts, paperwork duty, so nobody complained. State charges followed." Kovacs was additionally charged with assault causing bodily injury and official oppression. He was denied bail after prosecutors presented evidence that he had attempted to contact and intimidate witnesses through intermediaries. The federal trial of Darren Kovacs lasted 4 weeks. Every day, the courtroom filled with spectators, journalists, and civil rights advocates who had traveled from across the country to witness the proceedings. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. The security footage was played repeatedly from every available angle. Jurors watched in visible disgust as Kovacs grabbed Judge Johnson's arm, slammed her onto the screening table, and pressed his knee into her back while she bled. Several jurors looked away. One wiped tears from her eyes. Kovacs took the stand in his own defense. His attorney had advised against it, but Kovacs insisted. He told the jury he was just following training and that Judge Johnson had presented a suspicious profile that warranted additional screening. The cross-examination destroyed him. Prosecutors produced the department's official training materials, which explicitly prohibited the level of force Kovacs had used. They showed his text messages to fellow officers, jokes about going on airport safari and celebrating when he caught another one. They played his body camera footage showing him smirking and saying, "Watch me deal with this one," before approaching a woman who had done nothing wrong. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. Kovacs was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and received a lifetime ban from law enforcement in any capacity. Lieutenant Frank Ingram received 4 years, his cooperation during the investigation considered as a mitigating factor. Chief Bernard Foley received 3 years and was ordered to forfeit his pension. Officer Neil Stanton received probation, was terminated from the force, and was required to testify in all subsequent civil proceedings. 3 months after the criminal convictions, Judge Monique Johnson filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. The defendants named in the complaint included Darren Kovacs, Frank Ingram, Bernard Foley, the City of Charlotte, and the Charlotte Airport Authority. The lawsuit alleged systemic discrimination, failure to train, failure to supervise, and deliberate indifference to the constitutional rights of minority travelers. Discovery revealed the full scope of the department's failures. Over the previous 10 years, 847 complaints had been filed against Charlotte Airport police officers. 91% of those complaints involved minority travelers. Not a single complaint had resulted in a sustained finding against any officer. Expert witnesses testified that such a statistical pattern was impossible without systemic discrimination embedded in departmental policy and practice. The city's attorneys attempted to settle. They offered $5 million to make the case go away quietly. Judge Johnson refused. She demanded full accountability policy changes, independent oversight, a public admission of wrongdoing, and the creation of a civilian review board with real authority. The city refused her terms. The trial proceeded. After 3 weeks of testimony, evidence, and expert analysis, the jury returned its verdict. They awarded $12.4 million in compensatory damages for Judge Johnson's physical injuries, emotional distress, and harm to her professional reputation. They added $8.7 million in punitive damages against the individual officers. The total $21.1 million was the largest civil rights verdict against an airport police department in American history. In the months that followed, 19 other victims filed their own lawsuits. Their settlements totaled an additional $14 million. Judge Monique Johnson returned to the bench 3 months after the assault. Her shoulder had healed, though she would carry a faint scar beneath her left eye for the rest of her life. Her first case back was a civil rights matter involving police misconduct, a fact that did not escape the notice of legal observers watching her courtroom. She used a significant portion of her settlement funds to establish the Johnson Justice Initiative, a nonprofit organization providing free legal representation to victims of discrimination who could not afford attorneys. Within its first year, the initiative took on more than 200 cases nationwide. The Charlotte Airport Police Department was disbanded entirely. The city rebuilt the force from the ground up with new leadership, new hiring standards, and new accountability structures. Mandatory bias training became required for all officers. A civilian oversight board was created with the power to investigate complaints independently. Every allegation of misconduct would now be reviewed by an outside body with no ties to the department. A federal consent decree required 10 years of Department of Justice monitoring to ensure compliance. Darren Kovacs served his sentence at a federal correctional facility in West Virginia. He never apologized. He filed 3 appeals, all of which were denied. In a prison interview conducted 2 years into his sentence, he showed no remorse. "I was doing my job," he said. "She should have just complied." Judge Johnson responded in an interview of her own. "I did comply," she said. "I complied with every request while being assaulted." Compliance isn't the issue. The issue is that some officers see black skin and see a threat, regardless of credentials, accomplishments, or behavior. My robe didn't protect me. My credentials didn't protect me. The only thing that protected me was that camera. 2 years after the incident, Judge Johnson walked through Charlotte Douglas International Airport on her way to another hearing in Washington. Her head was high. Her stride was steady. TSA agents nodded respectfully as she passed. Officer Darren Kovacs thought he could assault a black woman and face no consequences. He forgot that the cameras were watching. He forgot that truth has a way of surfacing. And he forgot that sometimes the person you target has spent her entire career ensuring that justice prevails even when it's delayed. Now, watching footage like this, it can really stick with you, right? Some of these clips stay in your head, especially late at night when you're trying to fall asleep. And speaking of sleep, if you're someone who lies awake at 2 or 3 a.m., mind racing, unable to shut off, I know how frustrating that is. You're exhausted, but your brain just won't stop. And the worst part? The less you sleep, the worse it gets. Your energy crashes, your mood suffers, everything feels harder than it should. I struggled with this for years. Tried melatonin, white noise, warm milk, nothing worked long term. Then I found something called the 30-Day Uninterrupted Sleep Reset. It's a science-based program, no pills, no medication, that actually retrains your brain to sleep through the night, 7 to 8 hours, uninterrupted. Over 30 days, it rewires your sleep system. And once you're done, you keep the results, there's a maintenance plan, so you don't slip back. Look, if you've tried everything and nothing sticks, this is different. Check the link in the description. Seriously, try it. And I'll catch you in the next story.
Stand up, now. I need identification and proof that uniform is yours.
Officer, I am Senior Chief Petty Officer Nathaniel Garrison, United States Navy. What crime am I suspected of?
Don't argue with me. Anyone can buy that costume. Hands visible. Get up.
My military ID.
Officer Dustin Hargrove thought he was protecting a school. Anonymous tip. Suspicious black male in military clothing near Ridgemont High School. Possibly armed. Possibly impersonating military personnel. In his mind, responding aggressively was standard protocol. He had profiled dozens of people based on nothing more than how they looked. Never questioned, never challenged. But when he rolled up to a graduation ceremony with over 2,000 people in attendance, local news cameras filming, and the school district's own live stream broadcasting to hundreds of families watching from home, and targeted the only black man in a military uniform, he made a catastrophic miscalculation. The man he targeted was a decorated Navy SEAL with 24 years of active service. And when Hargrove destroyed the proudest moment of that man's life in front of his daughter, his elderly mother, and an entire community, he set in motion a chain of events that would end in 18 years of federal prison. Hargrove had been with the Ridgemont Police Department for 16 years. Beneath his reputation for proactive policing lay 11 civilian complaints over 9 years, each alleging racial profiling. Every complaint dismissed. The call came in at 1:47 p.m. on a Saturday in late May. Anonymous caller, suspicious black man in military clothing, possibly armed. No name, no specifics, no evidence. Hargrove didn't verify anything. He assembled 3 officers, Sergeant Lloyd Tatum, Officer Breanne Kendrick, and Officer Sam Novak. All 4 activated body cameras at 2:03 p.m. What Hargrove didn't know was that 2 district live stream cameras, a Channel 4 news crew, and dozens of parent phones were already recording. Every angle covered, every sound captured. Senior Chief Petty Officer Nathaniel Nate Garrison sat in the front row, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt completely at peace. He was 44 years old. 24 years of active service with the United States Navy, Navy SEAL, 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, multiple classified deployments to places whose names would never appear in any newspaper. He had been shot at in 6 countries, carried wounded teammates through hostile territory, made decisions under fire that most people couldn't comprehend. And none of it compared to the pride swelling in his chest as he watched his daughter approach that podium. He wore his Navy dress white uniform, pressed to perfection. His medals were pinned in precise regulation order across his left chest, catching the afternoon sunlight. His SEAL trident, the gold insignia that only the most elite warriors in the American military earn the right to wear, gleamed above the ribbons. His name stitched in black letters, Garrison. He put them on today because his daughter asked him to. "Daddy, wear your uniform. I want everyone to see how proud I am of you." So he did. Beside him sat his mother, Barbara Garrison, 71, a retired school teacher, wearing a lavender dress and a corsage Amara had pinned to her chest that morning. On his other side, his son Elijah, 14, a hand-drawn sign on his lap reading, "That's my sister," in red and blue marker. Amara Garrison, 18 years old, valedictorian, 4.3 gigapascals, accepted to 3 Ivy League schools. She had dedicated her entire speech to her father, the man who missed birthdays in war zones so other families could be safe. She practiced it 40 times. She knew every word. And when she reached the podium, she found him in the front row in his gleaming whites and smiled. This was the day he promised he'd never miss. Amara leaned into the microphone, her voice steady, carrying across the field through the PA system. The first words of her valedictorian speech were about her father. "There's a man in the front row wearing a white uniform covered in medals he never talks about. He missed my 7th birthday because he was in a country I'm still not allowed to know the name of. He missed my 10th because he was recovering from wounds he never showed me. But he never missed telling me he loved me. Not once." She looked directly at Nate. He looked back, his eyes filling, his jaw tight with emotion. Barbara gripped his arm. Elijah held up his sign. The crowd was silent, emotional, 2,000 people hanging on every word. The live stream cameras captured the moment in wide angle. The Channel 4 crew zoomed in on Amara's face. Parents held phones steady, recording. And then, from the back of the graduation field, 4 officers appeared. Hargrove led, walking with purpose, his body camera recording his view of the rows ahead. Tatum, Kendrick, and Novak flanked behind him, their cameras adding 3 more angles. They walked directly down the center aisle, past hundreds of white families seated in folding chairs, past grandparents and toddlers and proud parents, straight toward the front row, straight toward the only black man in a military uniform. Hargrove stepped in front of Nate, blocking his view of the stage. His body camera recorded Nate's face, looking up. The live stream captured the officers from behind, 4 dark uniforms standing over a man in white. The news camera caught it in profile. Dozens of phones swiveled, and at the podium, mid-sentence, Amara stuttered. Her voice caught. The microphone carried her silence to every corner of the field. "Stand up," Hargrove said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. His body camera recorded Nate's face from above, calm, controlled, the face of a man trained to remain composed under conditions that would break most people. "I need identification and proof that this uniform belongs to you." The accusation hung in the air. Impersonating military personnel, a federal crime under the Stolen Valor Act. The implication captured on 4 body cameras, 2 live stream feeds, the news camera, and every phone pointed in their direction. Nate didn't stand. He spoke quietly, his voice measured, aware that his daughter was watching from the stage, his mother was trembling beside him, and 2,000 people were staring. "Officer, my name is Senior Chief Petty Officer Nathaniel Garrison, United States Navy." He gestured to his chest, his medals, his trident. "This is my uniform. My name is stitched right here. My military ID is in my jacket pocket. What crime am I suspected of committing?" Hargrove's camera recorded his own dismissive gesture, waving away the medals, the trident, the name tape. 24 years of service dismissed with a flick of his wrist. Anyone can buy that stuff online. "I need real identification. Now." Nate's jaw tightened. The movement captured on Kendrick's camera from the side. "You haven't told me what crime I'm suspected of. Under the 4th Amendment, you need reasonable suspicion to—" "I'm not going to ask again," Hargrove interrupted. The threat was unmistakable. And then, through the PA system, carried across the entire field and picked up by every recording device present, Amara's voice cracked. "Dad?" 2,000 people heard it. The live stream broadcast it to hundreds of homes. Nate looked at his daughter, his eyes glistening. He mouthed the words, "Keep going, baby. I'm okay." He was not okay. "Step out of the row. Now." Hargrove's body camera recorded his own hand gesturing toward the aisle. Nate looked at his mother, looked at his son, then stood slowly, his dress whites rising above the seated crowd like a beacon. He squeezed past families in folding chairs, excusing himself quietly, his composure holding even as officers flanked him on both sides, hands resting on their weapons. Tatum's camera captured the families shrinking back as the officers passed. Kendrick's camera recorded their faces, confusion, fear, anger. Barbara grabbed Nate's arm as he stepped into the aisle, her fingers gripping his sleeve, tears streaming down her face. "Please, he didn't do anything. Please, stop this." Novak reached down and pushed her hand away, the gesture captured on his own body camera and on at least 4 phones from surrounding rows. A 71-year-old woman's hand brushed off her son's arm like she was an obstruction. Elijah shot to his feet, his sign crumpling in his fist, his face contorted with rage. The boy stepped toward Novak and Nate turned. His voice was calm, absolute, the voice of a man who had commanded operators in combat. "Sit down, son. Take care of your grandmother." Elijah stopped. His chest heaving, he sat. The school principal, Dr. Diane Ashford, rushed from the side of the stage, her heels sinking into the grass. "Officers, this man is an invited guest. He's a parent. He's a decorated military veteran. Please, you need to stop this." Hargrove ignored her. He positioned Nate on the open grass beside the ceremony, in full view of the stage, the crowd, and every camera. Then he patted him down, his hands running over the dress whites, pressing against the metal ribbons, displacing the bronze stars, pushing the trident crooked. Amara stood frozen at the podium, tears streaming down her face, watching her father being frisked at her graduation. The live stream carried every second to hundreds of homes. Hargrove reached into Nate's jacket pocket and pulled out a military identification card. Department of Defense, photo, name, rank, Senior Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy. He stared at it. His body camera recorded his own hands holding the card, the photo matching the man standing in front of him, the name matching the letters stitched on the uniform. Kendrick's camera captured Hargrove's expression. The flicker of doubt, the moment where a reasonable officer would have stopped, apologized, and walked away. Hargrove was not a reasonable officer. "This could be forged," he said. "We're taking you in for identity verification." Nate's voice was steady, but the tremor beneath it was captured on every microphone present. A man trained in SEER, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, using every ounce of that discipline to keep himself from breaking. "Officer, you're holding my Department of Defense identification. My name is on my uniform. My medals are verified. You have no probable cause. This is an unlawful arrest under the Fourth Amendment, and I am telling you clearly, for the record, that I do not consent." Hargrove pulled out his handcuffs. The metallic click echoed across the silent field, picked up by body cameras, the live stream, the news crew, and dozens of phones. He grabbed Nate's wrists and cuffed them behind his back. The metal bit into his skin. The crowd saw a decorated Navy SEAL in dress whites, hands bound behind him, standing on the grass of his daughter's graduation. And then, through the PA system, broadcast across the entire field and into hundreds of living rooms, Amara screamed, "Daddy!" The sound tore through the ceremony. Students burst into tears. Parents surged to their feet, shouting. Barbara collapsed against Elijah, sobbing. Nate was walked across the entire graduation field in handcuffs, his white uniform blazing in the afternoon sun, his medals catching light with every step. The longest walk of his life, recorded from at least 9 different angles. Amara's knees buckled. The live stream cameras captured her hands gripping the podium, her fingers white, her body folding as 2 teachers rushed from the side of the stage to catch her. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving in rapid, shallow gasps, her face contorted in a way that no 18-year-old should ever have to experience at her own graduation. The microphone was still live. The PA system carried the sound of her sobbing across the entire field, into every phone recording, into every live stream feed, into hundreds of living rooms where families sat watching in horror. Her valedictorian speech, months of preparation, 40 rehearsals, a love letter to the father who sacrificed everything, was never finished. The ceremony collapsed. Students in caps and gowns were crying in their seats. Parents were on their feet, some screaming at the officers retreating across the parking lot, others with phones pressed to their ears calling news stations, demanding answers. In the front row, Barbara Garrison was having a panic episode, her breathing ragged, her hands shaking uncontrollably, her lavender dress darkened with tears. Elijah held her, 14 years old, his arms wrapped around his grandmother, his face a mask of rage and helplessness that no child should ever have to wear. "Doctor." Ashford stood at the edge of the field, her phone pressed to her ear, shouting at the Ridgemont police chief. "You just arrested a Navy SEAL in front of 2,000 people at a graduation ceremony." His daughter collapsed on stage. "Do you understand what your officers have done?" But the damage was already beyond the field. The live stream footage had been screen recorded by hundreds of viewers the moment the handcuffs appeared. Uploads hit social media before Nate reached the patrol car. Within 90 minutes, 400,000 views. By nightfall, 6 million. The video had a title that wrote itself, and it was everywhere. At the Ridgemont precinct, Nate was booked for suspected identity fraud and failure to comply with a lawful order. Hargrove's body camera recorded the intake process, his perspective showing the booking desk, the fluorescent lights, the computer monitor. The booking officer, a man named Sergeant Victor Padilla, looked at the charges on the screen, then looked at Nate standing in handcuffs in his dress whites. His gaze moved to the SEAL trident on Nate's chest. Padilla was a Marine veteran, 12 years, 2 deployments to Fallujah. He recognized the trident immediately. Every service member would. His body camera captured his expression changing from routine processing to disbelief. "You arrested a SEAL?" he said, his voice quiet. "At his kid's graduation?" Hargrove's camera recorded his own defensive posture, arms crossed, jaw tight. He was non-cooperative, refused to provide adequate identification. Padilla ran Nate's information. His body camera captured the screen as results populated. Active duty, Senior Chief Petty Officer, 24 years of service, top secret security clearance, 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal. Every single thing Nate had told Hargrove in that field confirmed in under 3 minutes. He's exactly who he said he was, Padilla said flatly. His camera captured him turning to face Hargrove. Every word of it. Hargrove doubled down. He was non-cooperative and created a public disturbance. Padilla's camera recorded the long silence that followed. The body camera footage from the field showed the opposite. Nate never raised his voice, never resisted, never made a single aggressive movement. The only disturbance was created by 4 officers who interrupted a graduation ceremony to arrest an innocent man. Nate was held for 4 hours. During that time, 17 miles away, Amara Garrison was admitted to the emergency room for a severe anxiety attack. Nate didn't know until he was released. No one told him. The story didn't break. It detonated. By Sunday morning, the live stream footage had been downloaded, clipped, and reposted across every major platform. 9+ angles of an American hero in dress whites being handcuffed at his daughter's graduation. Body camera footage obtained through public records requests within days. The Channel 4 segment aired nationally. Phone videos from parents filled timelines with shaking, furious commentary. It became the most documented racial profiling incident in modern history. Veterans organizations responded with fury. The Navy released a formal statement confirming Nate's service record and honoring his 24 years of distinguished duty. 3 sitting Congress members demanded a federal investigation. The NAACP issued a public condemnation. The ACLU offered immediate legal support. Military advocacy organizations lined up behind the Garrison family. Retired SEALs posted videos of their own tridents, captioning them with 3 words, "We know our own." The Ridgemont Police Department issued a carefully worded statement expressing confidence in their officers' judgment. It lasted 12 hours before being deleted. Investigators traced the anonymous call. It came from a woman named Judith Langford, a parent at the graduation seated 6 rows behind the Garrison family. When questioned, she told investigators she just felt uncomfortable seeing a black man in a military uniform. She said it didn't look right. She assumed no black man would actually be a Navy SEAL, so the uniform had to be fake. She made the call during the opening remarks, before Amara even reached the podium. She watched from her seat as officers arrested Nate. She never spoke up, never told them she had no evidence, never intervened as a father was dragged from his daughter's graduation based on her discomfort. She was never charged. Her phone call wasn't illegal, just racist, and it had destroyed a family's most important day. Attorney Vivian Okafor Price had spent 22 years fighting cases that other lawyers considered unwinnable: former JAG officer, military law, civil rights litigation. She had argued before federal courts, deposed generals, and dismantled qualified immunity defenses that most attorneys wouldn't touch. When she watched the body camera footage for the first time, all 4 angles synchronized on her office monitors, she called Nate within the hour. She filed a federal civil rights lawsuit in the United States District Court. Nathaniel Garrison versus City of Ridgemont, Officer Dustin Hargrove, Sergeant Lloyd Tatum, Officer Breanne Kendrick, and Officer Sam Novak. The complaint alleged violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments, false arrest, unlawful seizure, racial profiling, retaliation for exercising constitutional rights, assault against Barbara Garrison, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and deprivation of rights under color of law. But Okafor Price wasn't satisfied with a civil case. She pushed for criminal prosecution. The U.S. Attorney's Office reviewed the body camera footage alongside the live stream recordings, the news footage, and the phone videos. They saw what everyone saw: an officer targeting a man based on race, dismissing valid credentials, humiliating him publicly, arresting him without probable cause. Discovery cracked the department open. Hargrove's 11 prior complaints were entered into evidence. Internal affairs files showed each one dismissed with identical language: insufficient evidence to sustain. Internal emails between supervisors contained references to maintaining neighborhood character and managing community concerns about unfamiliar elements. Federal prosecutors filed criminal charges against Hargrove. Deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Conspiracy to deprive civil rights, 18 U.S.C. Section 241. False arrest, assault for the physical contact with Barbara Garrison. Tatum, Kendrick, and Novak were named as co-conspirators. The trial lasted 5 weeks. The trial was devastating. The courtroom was packed every single day. Civil rights advocates, veterans in uniform, members of the Ridgemont community, and national media who recognized this as a defining case about racial profiling in America. On the third day, prosecutors played the footage. All 9 angles synchronized on screens positioned around the courtroom. Body cameras, the school live stream, the Channel 4 news feed, phone recordings from parents. The jury watched Hargrove walk past hundreds of white families and stop directly in front of the only black man in a military uniform. They watched him dismiss the medals, the trident, the name tape, the military ID. They watched him pat down the dress whites, pushing the bronze stars crooked. They watched Nate walk across the graduation field in handcuffs, his white uniform blazing in the sun, and they heard Amara's scream, "Daddy." Played through the courtroom speakers, the sound ripped through the room. 3 jurors broke down crying. Nate testified for 6 hours over 2 days. He described his service, his sacrifices, the promise he made to never miss his daughter's graduation. He described the discipline it took to remain calm while being humiliated in front of his family and his community. Amara testified. She described the nightmares, the panic attacks, the fact that she couldn't watch her own graduation video, that she never finished her speech, that the day she'd planned for years was destroyed in 17 minutes. Barbara testified about an officer pushing her hand off her own son's arm. Former SEALs testified about what the trident means, what it costs, what Nate sacrificed to earn it. Hargrove's qualified immunity defense was dismantled. He was told by the principal, by Nate, by the visible evidence of a legitimate uniform. He arrested anyway, guilty on all counts. 18 years, federal prison. The civil lawsuit settled during the damages phase, $22.4 million, the largest individual racial profiling settlement in United States history. Hargrove was taken into custody from the courtroom. Tatum and Kendrick each received 4-year federal sentences as co-conspirators. Novak, who had attempted to intervene during the arrest and been overruled by Hargrove, testified for the prosecution and received a suspended sentence. The Ridgemont Police Department was placed under a federal consent decree, mandatory reforms, civilian oversight board with independent investigation authority, quarterly bias training with documented testing, body camera compliance protocols with severe penalties for non-compliance, demographic data collection on all stops and arrests with public reporting, an independent monitor appointed by the Department of Justice to review all complaints of racial profiling for a minimum of 5 years. Nate used a portion of his settlement to establish the Garrison Shield Foundation, providing free legal defense for veterans and active duty service members subjected to racial profiling and civil rights violations. He spoke at military installations across the country, sharing his story with service members who had experienced the same thing but never had the evidence to prove it. Amara eventually delivered her speech, not at graduation, not at Ridgemont High School. She delivered it before a congressional committee on racial profiling in law enforcement, reading the full text for the first time, her voice steady, broadcast live on C-SPAN to millions. She finished the words she never got to say. Then, she looked into the camera and added new ones. "My father served this country for 24 years. He bled for it. He nearly died for it. And on the proudest day of his life, he was treated like a criminal because of the color of his skin. That has to mean something. It has to change something." She enrolled at Yale on a full scholarship. The case became required study material at Quantico, at police academies nationwide, and at the Naval Academy. because a man who spent 24 years protecting his country shouldn't need protection from its police. But when he did, the truth was captured from 9 different angles, and justice, for once, was undeniable. If you believe that every American who serves deserves to be honored, not humiliated, that racial profiling has no place in law enforcement, and that the truth recorded on body cameras and live streams and phone videos can hold power accountable. This case was intense, but this case on the right-hand side is even more insane.
Which seat?
3A. Fake federal ID says she's a judge.
Ma'am, stand. Hands where I can see them.
I am Denise Lockhart, United States District Judge. You can verify it right now.
It's fake. You know how they do this. Cuff her.
Hands
Now.
behind your back.
You're making a career.
At 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, a black woman was handcuffed in the first-class cabin of a Sterling Atlantic Airlines flight from Atlanta to Washington, D.C. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't broken a single regulation. She had done nothing but sit in a seat she paid for, open a laptop, and ask a flight attendant for his name. The woman was the Honorable Denise Lockhart, a United States federal judge with 11 years on the bench, appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. The man who triggered her arrest was Craig Pennington, a senior flight attendant with 8 years at the airline and 31 complaints from passengers of color that his employer had buried and never acted on. He looked at her and decided she didn't belong, and before that plane touched the ground, he would set in motion a chain of events that would cost Sterling Atlantic $3.5 million, end his career, and land him in a federal courtroom on the wrong side of a civil rights charge. Judge Lockhart was 54 years old. She had spent more than 2 decades in law, first as a public defender, then as a federal prosecutor, and for the last 11 years as a U.S. District Judge for the District of Columbia. She was flying home from visiting her elderly mother and was due in chambers the next morning to preside over a high-profile discrimination case. She dressed comfortably. A dark cardigan, reading glasses around her neck, a leather bag with case files, no title on display. She walked to seat 3A, placed her carry-on in the overhead bin, and sat down. She was one of 4 passengers in first class. She was the only one who was black. Craig Pennington stood at the front of the cabin watching passengers file in. He was 46 years old, 18 years with Sterling Atlantic, and held the title of lead cabin crew. Among colleagues, he was known for running a tight cabin, a phrase that in his case meant controlling who got attention and who got ignored. Over 9 years, 31 passengers had filed complaints against him. Every single one was a person of color. The complaints described the same patterns: boarding passes questioned, drink service skipped, seats double-checked. In one case, a black surgeon had been asked 3 times whether he was sure he was in the right cabin. Each complaint was closed without action. Pennington had never been disciplined, never been retrained, never been told to change. That afternoon, he watched Lockhart settle into 3A, and his eyes stayed on her a beat too long. Before the doors closed, Pennington approached her row. "Ma'am, I just need to verify your boarding pass." Lockhart handed it over. He studied it longer than necessary, turned it over, held it at an angle. The pass was clear. First class, seat 3A, paid in full. "There might be a seating error in the system," he said. "I need to sort this out." Lockhart's voice was calm. "There's no error. That's my seat." He walked toward the galley. He didn't check a single other passenger's pass. Not the white businessman in 3C, not the couple in row 2. Only Lockhart. He returned 4 minutes later. "Ma'am, other passengers have expressed concern about a possible mix-up." No other passenger had said a word. Lockhart met his eyes. "I'm where I'm supposed to be." Pennington held the look, then turned and walked away. His expression was tight. Lockhart watched him go. She had been a judge long enough to recognize what was happening. She had also been a black woman long enough to know exactly what it looked like. The flight leveled at cruising altitude, and Pennington began first-class service. He started at row 1, hot towels, drinks, a warm smile. He moved to row 2, same routine. He stopped at row 3, served the white businessman in 3C a whiskey neat in a glass tumbler, exchanged a few words, and then walked past Lockhart without a glance. He continued to the row behind her. The older white couple received their drinks within minutes. Lockhart sat with nothing. She waited. After several minutes, she pressed the call button above her seat. The chime sounded. Pennington was visible near the galley, arranging a tray. He didn't look up. 14 minutes passed before he appeared at her row. "Sorry about that. Galley's backed up right now. What can I get you?" She asked for a glass of water. He nodded and walked away. She watched him stop at the row behind her, refill the couple's wine, and chat briefly before disappearing into the galley again. 20 minutes later, he returned with her water. It was lukewarm, served in a small plastic cup, the kind used in economy. Every other first-class passenger had crystal glassware. Lockhart looked at the cup, then at Pennington. He was already turning away. A second flight attendant, Nora Saunders, 28, 2 years with the airline, stood near the galley partition. She had watched the entire sequence. Her lips pressed together. She shifted her weight. She said nothing. Lockhart set the plastic cup on her tray table, reached into her bag, and quietly opened the voice memo app on her phone. She placed it face down beside her and pressed record. She didn't announce it. She didn't make a scene. She simply began documenting what she already knew wasn't going to stop. Midway through the flight, Lockhart opened her laptop. She logged into the federal court's secure document system and began reviewing case files for the discrimination trial she was set to preside over the following morning. Her screen showed legal briefs, sealed motions, judicial notes. She worked quietly, the way she had on dozens of flights before. Pennington walked down the aisle carrying a tray of empty glasses. He slowed as he passed row 3. His eyes moved to her screen. He didn't stop, but his pace changed. He looked at the laptop, then at Lockhart, then continued toward the front galley. He set the tray down and picked up the in-flight phone that connected directly to the cockpit. "Captain, this is Pennington. I've got a passenger in 3A I need to flag. She's been behaving suspiciously since boarding. She's accessing some kind of material on a laptop that doesn't look right. I don't think she matches the profile of a first-class passenger." There was a pause. The captain asked if the passenger had been disruptive. "Not yet," Pennington said, "but you know how these things escalate. I'd rather be safe." The captain asked what specifically was suspicious. Pennington hesitated for half a second. "She's just not right. Something's off. I'm calling it a security concern." The captain, following airline protocol that gave lead cabin crew authority to flag in-flight threats, contacted Sterling Atlantic Ground Operations at Dulles. He relayed the crew's concern. Ground Operations contacted Airport Police Dispatch and requested that law enforcement officers meet Flight 4721 at the gate upon arrival. The request was logged as a potential security incident. At 30,000 feet, with no crime committed and no regulation broken, the machinery had already started moving, and Lockhart, still reviewing her case files, had no idea what was waiting for her on the ground. Pennington came back down the aisle 10 minutes later. This time, his posture was different. Shoulders squared, clipboard in hand, jaw set. He stopped at row 3 and looked down at Lockhart. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to close that laptop and stow all personal items immediately. Security protocol." Lockhart looked up from her screen. "Which protocol?" Pennington's eyes flickered. "It's a cabin security protocol. I need you to comply." Lockhart's voice remained even. "There is no FAA regulation that requires a passenger to close a laptop during cruise altitude. I'm not in violation of anything. Which specific protocol are you referring to?" Pennington couldn't name one. His grip tightened on the clipboard. "Ma'am, if you don't comply with crew instructions, I will have you restrained and removed from this aircraft upon landing." The cabin went quiet. The older couple behind her stopped mid-conversation. The man in 1A lowered his newspaper. The white businessman in 3C leaned forward and spoke. "She hasn't done anything. I've been sitting here the entire flight. She's been reading on her laptop. That's it." Pennington's head snapped toward him. "Sir, this doesn't involve you. I'd suggest you stay out of it." The businessman held his gaze for a moment, then sat back, shaking his head. 2 rows behind Lockhart, a woman traveling with her teenage daughter quietly raised her phone and began recording. She angled it carefully, capturing Pennington standing over Lockhart's seat, his posture aggressive, his voice loud enough to carry through the cabin. Lockhart hadn't moved. Her hands were still on the keyboard. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp. She had spent her career watching people abuse authority. She recognized the pattern. She also recognized that this was no longer just poor service. It was something else entirely. Pennington didn't walk away. He planted himself beside row 3 and raised the stakes. "Ma'am, I'm now going to need you to hand over that laptop. It's being classified as evidence related to a security concern." Lockhart closed the laptop slowly, but kept it on her tray table. Her voice was clear enough for the rows around her to hear. "You have no authority to seize my personal property. I am a fare-paying passenger in a confirmed seat. I have broken no law and violated no regulation. You are not law enforcement." Pennington's face flushed. He turned toward the galley and called out, "Nora, come here." Nora Saunders appeared from behind the partition. Pennington pointed at Lockhart. "I need you to stay here and keep eyes on this passenger in case she becomes aggressive." Nora looked at Lockhart, a 54-year-old woman, sitting still with her hands folded on a closed laptop. Nora's mouth opened slightly, then closed. She stepped to the side of the aisle and stood there, arms crossed, visibly uncomfortable. She didn't say a word. Lockhart turned back to Pennington. "I'd like your full name and employee identification number." Pennington stiffened. "That's not something I'm required to give you." She asked again, louder this time, her voice carrying through the first-class cabin. "I am asking for your name and your employee ID. I have a right to know who is threatening me on this aircraft." Pennington leaned in close enough that only she should have heard what he said next. "You're going to regret making this difficult." But 2 rows back, the mother's phone was still recording. The microphone picked up every word. Pennington straightened up and walked back toward the galley. Lockhart sat motionless, her phone still recording face down beside her. She was no longer just a passenger being mistreated. She was a federal judge building a record. The plane touched down at Dulles at 7:12 p.m. Before the seatbelt sign clicked off, Pennington's voice came over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats. We have a brief security procedure before deplaning. Do not stand or open the overhead bins until instructed." The cabin stirred. Passengers exchanged looks. This wasn't normal for a domestic flight. Lockhart sat still in 3A, laptop stowed, hands resting on her lap. She already knew. The forward cabin door opened, and 2 armed airport police officers stepped on board. They were directed immediately to row 3. Officer Vince Delano, 36, led the way. His partner followed a step behind, hand resting near his belt. Pennington intercepted them before they reached Lockhart. He spoke in a low voice, but not low enough. "She's been non-compliant since boarding. Aggressive, refused direct orders from cabin crew. I flagged it as a possible security threat. I'd be careful with her." Delano looked past Pennington toward 3A. He saw a middle-aged woman sitting upright, hands visible, expression calm. No raised voice, no disturbance, no indication of anything resembling a threat. He approached her row. "Ma'am, I need you to stand up, please." Lockhart stood. He asked for identification. She reached into her bag, opened her wallet, and produced a federal judicial ID card. It showed her photograph, her full name, her title, the Honorable Denise Lockhart, and her court, United States District Court for the District of Columbia. Delano looked at the ID. He looked at Pennington, who stood behind him near the galley. He looked back at the ID. The cabin was silent. Every passenger in first class was watching. The businessman in 3C had his jaw tight. The older couple behind her hadn't moved. Delano held the ID in his hand for a long moment, and then he made the worst decision of his career. Delano stared at the ID. Federal Judge, U.S. District Court. The photo matched the woman standing in front of him. Before he could speak, Pennington stepped closer. "She could have faked that. You don't know. People fake things all the time." Delano hesitated. He keyed the radio on his shoulder and called his supervisor. "I've got a passenger in first class." Crew flagged her as a security concern. "She's produced a federal judicial ID, requesting guidance." The supervisor, sitting in a dispatch office on the other side of the terminal, had no visual on the situation, no body cam footage, no context beyond what he was hearing through a radio. His response was brief. "Bring her in for processing. Better safe than sorry. We'll sort it out on the ground." Delano lowered the radio. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to place your hands behind your back." Lockhart didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She placed her hands behind her back, palms open. The cuffs clicked shut in the first-class cabin of a commercial aircraft, in front of every passenger still seated. The mother, 2 rows back, held her phone steady. The video captured everything. A 54-year-old black woman in handcuffs, standing straight, face composed, dignity intact. And behind the officers, Craig Pennington stood with his arms crossed, chin slightly raised, watching. The mother's son, a boy of 9, stared at the scene with tears running down his face. His mother leaned close and whispered, "Don't look away. Remember this." Delano and his partner walked Lockhart up the aisle toward the cabin door. Passengers pressed against their seats to make room. No one spoke. She was led through the jet bridge in handcuffs, past gate agents who stopped mid-task, past waiting passengers who turned and stared, past a Sterling Atlantic supervisor who looked at the cuffs and then looked away. Not one of them asked what she had done, because she hadn't done anything. The airport police station was a windowless room on the lower level of Dulles Terminal. Fluorescent lights, a metal table, 2 chairs. Lockhart was seated on one side, hands still cuffed behind her back. She hadn't said a word since leaving the plane. Delano sat across from her with a clipboard. He asked for her full name, Denise Yvonne Lockhart, occupation, United States District Judge, District of Columbia. She gave him her chamber's direct number and the name of her judicial assistant. Delano wrote it down, then stepped out. He made the call from the hallway. Federal court security answered on the second ring. It took less than 3 minutes. The Honorable Denise Lockhart, appointed by the President, confirmed by the United States Senate, 11 years on the federal bench, active caseload including a civil rights trial scheduled to begin the following morning. Delano walked back into the room. The color had left his face. His partner, who had been standing near the door, looked at him once and stepped out without a word. Lockhart watched Delano set the clipboard down. His hands weren't steady. She spoke first. "I told you who I was on the plane. I showed you my identification. You looked at it, and you chose not to listen. Uncuff me." Delano moved behind her and removed the handcuffs. The red marks on her wrists were already visible. He started to speak. "Judge Lockhart, I'm sorry, She cut him off. "Don't apologize to me. That's not what I need from you right now. What I need is for you to document everything that happened on that aircraft and in this room. Every word that flight attendants said to you, every instruction your supervisor gave, every second I spent in these cuffs. Because this is not over." Delano nodded. He picked up his pen. His hand was shaking. The call started before Lockhart left the station. Her senior law clerk, reached by phone at 8:40 p.m., contacted the federal court's administrative office immediately. By 9:15 p.m., the chief judge of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia was on a call with the Department of Justice. The message was direct. A sitting federal judge had been handcuffed and detained on a commercial flight based on nothing but the word of a flight attendant and the color of her skin. The DOJ Civil Rights Division opened a preliminary inquiry that same night. Agents were assigned. Evidence preservation requests were sent to Sterling Atlantic Airlines, to Dulles Airport Police, and to the airline's ground operations office. Lockhart provided her audio recording, over 40 minutes of continuous documentation, including Pennington's whispered threat, his fabricated security claims, and the moment the cuffs went on. The mother's video surfaced on social media within 24 hours. It was 3 minutes and 47 seconds long. It showed Pennington standing over Lockhart's seat. It showed the officers approaching. It showed a 54-year-old black woman being handcuffed in first class while a flight attendant watched from the galley with his arms crossed. It showed a 9-year-old boy crying. Within a day, the The video had 2 million views. By the end of the week, it had passed 11 million. National news networks ran it on every cycle. Legal experts appeared on cable broadcasts calling it one of the most clear-cut cases of racial discrimination on a commercial flight in recent memory. Sterling Atlantic Airlines released a statement. The airline is aware of the incident and is conducting a thorough internal review. We are committed to the safety and dignity of all passengers. The statement said nothing about Pennington, nothing about the 31 prior complaints, nothing about the federal judge they had allowed to be arrested on their aircraft. It said nothing because they were already afraid of what was coming. Lockhart retained civil rights attorney Claudia Ferreira, a former DOJ prosecutor who had built a reputation dismantling institutional discrimination cases with surgical precision. Ferreira filed a federal lawsuit against Sterling Atlantic Airlines, Craig Pennington individually, and the Dulles Airport Police Authority. The claims included racial discrimination, unlawful detention, civil rights violations, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Then discovery began, and what it revealed was worse than anyone outside the airline could have imagined. Internal records showed all 31 complaints against Pennington. Every single one involved a passenger of color. Every single one had been closed without discipline. HR emails between supervisors described Pennington as old-fashioned and a bit rough around the edges, but ultimately harmless. One email from a regional HR manager advised a black woman who had filed a complaint that crew discretion in managing cabin dynamics was standard practice across the industry, and that her experience, while regrettable, did not constitute a policy violation. Training records showed that Sterling Atlantic's entire diversity and inclusion program consisted of a single 4-5-minute online video module. 40% of cabin crew had never completed it. Pennington was among them. But the most damaging evidence came from Pennington's own company email account. He had sent messages to colleagues mocking black passengers seated in first class. One read, "Another one in 2B who clearly used someone else's miles." Another said, "Full cabin today." 3 of them up front, going to be a long flight. The airline had access to these emails. Their servers stored them. Their filters flagged nothing. Their managers saw the complaints pile up year after year and never once connected the dots. They knew who Pennington was. They knew what he was doing. And they did nothing because no one had made enough noise to force them to care. The DOJ Civil Rights Division moved faster than Sterling Atlantic expected. Federal prosecutors reviewed the evidence, the audio recording, the passenger video, Delano's Bodycam footage, Pennington's call to the cockpit, and his statements to the officers on board, and made a decision that would elevate the case beyond a civil matter. They charged Craig Pennington with deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. The legal theory was precise. Pennington was not law enforcement. But by contacting the captain, triggering a security alert, directing armed officers to a specific passenger, and feeding them false claims of aggression and non-compliance, he had effectively weaponized state authority against Lockhart. He had used police as an instrument of racial discrimination. That, prosecutors argued, brought his actions within the reach of federal civil rights law. Pennington was arrested at his home on a Wednesday morning. 2 federal agents knocked on his door at 6:15 a.m. His mugshot was released that afternoon and circulated nationally within hours. Sterling Atlantic suspended him immediately, calling it a personnel matter under review. Officer Vince Delano faced a separate reckoning. An internal investigation by the Airport Police Department found that he had seen valid federal judicial identification, heard a flight attendant with no law enforcement authority override that identification, and proceeded with an arrest without independent verification. He was placed on unpaid leave pending the outcome of the review. His partner was reassigned. The Airport Police Department entered into a consent agreement with the DOJ requiring new protocols for all airline-initiated law enforcement requests, including mandatory independent verification of crew claims before any passenger could be detained. The machinery of accountability was now moving on multiple tracks, and none of them were slowing down. The criminal trial began on a Monday in federal court and lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution's case was methodical and overwhelming. They opened with Officer Delano's body cam footage, which showed the moment he boarded the aircraft, Pennington intercepting him in the aisle, the whispered briefing, the walk to row 3, and the handcuffing of a woman who had not moved, not raised her voice, and not broken a single rule. They played the mother's cell phone video. The jury watched a 9-year-old boy cry as a 5'4" black woman was led away in handcuffs while a flight attendant stood in the galley with his arms folded. They played Lockhart's audio recording, 40 minutes of continuous documentation, Pennington's fabricated security protocol, his demand for her laptop, his whispered threat, "You're going to regret making this difficult." They presented his emails, the jokes about black passengers in first class, the language, the tone. Then 7 other former passengers took the stand. All people of color. All had flown Sterling Atlantic and encountered Pennington. One woman described being moved from her first-class seat to economy because Pennington told her there had been an overbooking error. There hadn't been. A black professor testified that Pennington had asked to see his boarding pass 3 times on a single flight while never once checking the white passengers around him. The patterns were identical. The behavior was consistent. The airline had done nothing. Pennington's defense argued he had been following security protocols and exercising professional judgment. The prosecution dismantled this in a single afternoon. They brought Sterling Atlantic's own operations manual into evidence. No protocol existed for what Pennington had done. None. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. The verdict was guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Craig Pennington to 2 years in federal prison. He showed no reaction. Lockhart, seated in the gallery, showed none either. She didn't need to. The record spoke for itself. The civil case never reached trial. Sterling Atlantic's attorneys reviewed the evidence, the emails, the complaint history, the training failures, the video now seen by tens of millions of people, and advised the airline's board that going before a jury would be catastrophic. They settled. The total was $3.5 million, $1.8 million in direct damages to Judge Lockhart for unlawful detention, racial discrimination, emotional distress, and reputational harm. The remaining $1.7 million was allocated to fund systemic reforms mandated as part of the settlement agreement. The required changes were specific and binding. Sterling Atlantic was to establish an independent oversight board with authority to review all crew complaints involving allegations of discrimination. Quarterly bias training would be mandatory for every member of cabin crew, with written testing and documented completion. Failure to complete training would result in suspension. A passenger bill of rights would be printed and posted visibly on every aircraft in the fleet. A zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory service would be implemented with termination on first confirmed offense. No warnings, no reassignments, no second chances. And the airline CEO would deliver a public apology on camera, read in full, broadcast on the company's website and social media channels, acknowledging the systemic failures that had allowed Pennington's behavior to continue unchecked for nearly a decade. Lockhart sat in Ferreira's office when the settlement was finalized. She reviewed every clause. Then she made a decision about the money. She donated her entire portion to a foundation she established herself. She called it the Equal Skies Initiative. Its purpose was to provide free legal representation to airline passengers who experienced racial discrimination and didn't have the resources or the title to fight back on their own. Because Lockhart understood something clearly, she had been heard because of who she was. The foundation would exist for everyone who wasn't. Craig Pennington served 18 months in federal prison and was released on good behavior. He never issued a public apology, never acknowledged what he had done, never expressed remorse to Lockhart or to any of the passengers he had mistreated over the years. His name became a case study. Airline training programs across the country incorporated the incident into mandatory modules on bias, discrimination, and abuse of crew authority. His mugshot appeared beside the footage. His emails were quoted in slides. He became the example of exactly what the industry could no longer afford to ignore. Officer Vince Delano resigned from the airport police 3 months after the consent agreement was finalized. He left law enforcement entirely. He gave no interviews and made no public statements. His partner had already transferred to a different division before the trial began. Nora Saunders, the junior flight attendant who had stood in the aisle and said nothing while a federal judge was humiliated and handcuffed, gave a public interview 6 months after the settlement. She described the moment Pennington told her to watch Lockhart in case she became aggressive. She said she knew immediately it was wrong. She said her hands were shaking. She said she opened her mouth and nothing came out. She cried during the interview. She now works as a trainer for a national airline crew advocacy group, teaching cabin staff how to intervene when they witness discrimination by a colleague. The white businessman from 3C, a corporate executive named Leonard Ashford, wrote an op-ed for a national newspaper. He described watching the entire incident unfold from 3 feet away. He described speaking up once and being told to stay out of it. He described sitting in silence while Lockhart was cuffed and walked off the plane. He called it the moment he understood that witnessing injustice and doing the minimum were not the same thing. Lockhart returned to the bench. The civil rights case she had been flying home to preside over resulted in a landmark ruling that was cited in federal courts for years after. She never gave a single public interview about the flight, never wrote about it, never appeared on a panel or a podcast. She let the footage, the verdict, and the record speak for themselves. Sterling Atlantic's internal training video now opens with a single clip from that flight. Pennington standing in the galley with his arms crossed while a federal judge is led past him in handcuffs. The screen holds on the image for 5 seconds before a caption appears. This is what failure looks like. This case was disturbing, but the one on the right ends in a way no one expects.
Don't look away from me. I asked you a question. You're going to answer it right now.
Sir, we didn't do anything. We're just
Don't talk
waiting
back.
for
I know how
our
this goes. You kids think rules don't apply to you.
This is my iPad. It's ours.
Funny how you all say the same thing. Hand it over before I make this real ugly.
Please.
At 12:47 p.m., inside a McDonald's on Broad Street in suburban Richmond, Virginia, 3 black children sat in a corner booth, sharing a 20-piece nugget box and laughing over their iPads. Elijah was 12. Naomi was 10. Isaiah had just turned 7. They were well-dressed, well-mannered, and completely absorbed in their screens, the kind of quiet Saturday scene that wouldn't draw a second glance from anyone paying attention. Their iPads were brand new, still in bright-colored cases, gifts from their grandmother for straight-A report cards. Their grandmother was Judge Vivian Hartwell, 67 years old, a sitting federal judge on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals with 31 years on the bench. She had stepped away briefly to use the restroom, leaving the kids with their food and a simple instruction to stay in the booth. The restaurant was busy with the usual weekend crowd. Families with strollers, teenagers crowding the drink station, a few solo diners scrolling through their phones. Nobody was bothering anyone. Nobody was out of line. But near the front counter, a white woman had stopped eating her salad and was staring hard at the 3 children across the dining room. Her name was Karen Lipscomb, 54, and something about those kids and those iPads had already made her decide that what she was seeing didn't add up. Lipscomb stood and walked directly to the counter, where shift manager Devin Osei, 23, was restocking napkin dispensers. She leaned in and told him those kids over there had stolen those iPads out of someone's bag. Devin looked over at the booth. 3 children eating chicken nuggets and watching cartoons. He asked which customer was missing property. Lipscomb didn't answer the question. She said it again, louder this time, that she saw them take the iPads and that if this restaurant didn't do something about it, she would call corporate and report the entire staff for allowing theft. Devin hesitated. He had seen the children come in with their grandmother. He had taken their order himself. The iPads had been in the kids' hands the entire time. No customer had reported anything stolen. No one in the restaurant was looking for missing property, but Lipscomb was loud and getting louder, and Devin was 6 months into a job he couldn't afford to lose. He asked her one more time if she was sure. She told him to stop asking questions and call the police before those kids walked out with somebody else's property. Devin picked up the store phone and dialed 911. The call was recorded. Every word of it would later be played in a federal courtroom. Officer Russell Brandt pulled into the McDonald's parking lot 6 minutes after the 911 call. He was 2 years old with 18 years on the Richmond Metro Police Department. His service record told one story to his supervisors and a very different one to the communities he patrolled. Over the past 14 years, 31 formal complaints had been filed against him, disproportionately from Black and Latino residents. The allegations followed a pattern: excessive force during routine stops, aggressive language during encounters that didn't require aggression, racial slurs caught on a dash cam during a traffic stop 3 years earlier, footage that was mysteriously lost during the internal review process. He had been suspended twice, both times reduced to written reprimands after the police union intervened on his behalf. His supervisors had signed off on every dismissal, every reduced punishment, every second chance. Brandt had learned over the years that complaints didn't stick and consequences didn't come. His body camera was activated when he stepped out of his patrol car. The footage would later show him entering the restaurant, walking past a white family of 5 near the door, past a group of white teenagers by the soda fountain, past 2 elderly white couples sitting near the windows. He didn't stop at the counter to speak with Devin. He didn't look for Lipscomb to get a description or details. He walked directly across the dining room toward the only black children in the restaurant, 3 kids sitting in a corner booth with Happy Meals and iPads. Brandt stopped at the edge of the booth and stood at full height, looking down at the 3 of them. His hand rested on his duty belt. Elijah looked up first. Brandt asked where they got the iPads. Elijah answered politely, telling the officer they were his and his brothers and sisters, that their grandmother had bought them as gifts for their report cards. Brandt didn't acknowledge the answer. He looked at the devices, then back at Elijah, and asked how much he thought those iPads cost. Elijah didn't respond. Brandt leaned in closer and asked whether anyone in his family even had jobs. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. She looked at her older brother for reassurance, but Elijah's face had gone still, the kind of stillness a 12-year-old learns when he realizes the adult in front of him isn't interested in the truth. Isaiah, the youngest, pulled his iPad tight against his chest with both hands. Brandt pointed at the devices and told all 3 children to hand them over immediately, calling them suspected stolen property. Elijah asked if they could please wait for their grandmother. She was just in the restroom. Brandt said no. He said they could cooperate now or things would get a lot worse. Around them, the restaurant had gone quiet. Families had stopped eating. Conversations had dropped to whispers. At least 4 customers had already raised their phones and started recording. None of the children moved. They sat in that booth, food getting cold, waiting for an adult who would actually listen. Elijah didn't refuse. He hesitated. That was all. A 12-year-old boy looking down at the iPad his grandmother had given him, trying to understand why a police officer was demanding he hand over his own property. That hesitation lasted less than 2 seconds. Brandt reached across the table, grabbed Elijah's wrist, and yanked the iPad out of his hands. The motion was fast and hard enough that Elijah's shoulder jerked forward and his elbow knocked over a drink cup, sending orange soda across the tray. Isaiah screamed. Not a defiant scream, not a tantrum. The scream of a 7-year-old watching a grown man in uniform grab his brother. Brandt turned to the youngest child and pointed directly at his face. "Shut your mouth before I give you something to cry about." Naomi was frozen, tears running down both cheeks, her iPad sitting on the table in front of her. Brandt picked it up out of her trembling hands without a word. Isaiah was still holding his, both arms wrapped around it, pressing it into his small chest like it could protect him. Brandt reached down and pried the child's fingers off one by one. When Isaiah still wouldn't let go, Brandt pulled the device free and shoved the boy backward into the booth seat. The back of Isaiah's head hit the wall behind the booth with a sound that made the woman in the next table gasp. A man near the counter stood up and shouted, "They're children!" Brandt turned toward the dining room, pointed at the crowd, and said anyone who interfered would be arrested for obstruction of justice. He keyed his radio and reported 3 juvenile suspects, possible theft, uncooperative, requesting backup. All 3 children were sobbing. Their Happy Meals sat untouched. The iPads were stacked on the table behind Brandt's back like evidence from a crime scene that never existed. Officer Nina Saldano, 29, walked through the front door 4 minutes later. She had been with the department for just under 3 years. What she saw when she entered was not what dispatch had described. There were no juvenile suspects. There was no theft in progress. There were 3 children crying in a booth, a crowd of visibly upset customers, several phones recording from different angles, and her senior officer standing over the scene with 3 iPads lined up on the table behind him like confiscated contraband. Saldano moved to Brandt's side and spoke quietly. She told him this looked like a misunderstanding. She said maybe they should talk to the manager and figure out what actually happened before going any further. Brandt didn't lower his voice. "I've been doing this longer than you've been alive, rookie. These kids are lying." Saldano looked at the children. She looked at the crowd. She looked at the phones pointed in their direction, and she stepped back. She did not intervene. She did not challenge him again. She stood to the side and watched what happened next. Brandt told Elijah to stand up. The boy stood slowly, legs unsteady. Brandt turned him around and patted him down in front of the entire restaurant. Hands across the boy's pockets, his waistband, his sides. A 12-year-old in a McDonald's being searched like a suspect on a street corner. When Brandt was done, he asked all 3 children for identification. They stared at him. They had none. They were children. Brandt stepped back to his radio and called dispatch again. He requested a juvenile transport unit and stated his intention to take all 3 minors into custody for theft and uncooperative behavior. In the booth, Naomi held Isaiah's hand. Elijah stood where Brandt had left him, arms at his sides, staring at the floor. He didn't say a word. The restroom door opened, and Judge Vivian Hartwell stepped back into the dining room. She had been gone less than 5 minutes. What she walked into was nothing close to what she had left behind. Her 3 grandchildren were crying. Elijah was standing near the booth with his arms at his sides, face blank. Naomi and Isaiah were pressed together in the seat, holding hands. A uniformed officer stood over them with their iPads stacked on the table behind his back. A second officer stood off to the side doing nothing. The restaurant was silent except for the sound of her grandchildren sobbing. Vivian crossed the dining room without hesitation. "What is happening to my grandchildren?" Brandt turned. "Ma'am, step back. These children are being detained." Vivian did not step back. She stopped directly in front of him and spoke clearly and without raising her voice. She gave her full name. She told him she was the children's grandmother. She told him the iPads were their personal property, purchased by her 2 weeks ago as gifts for their report cards, and that she had the receipts on her phone if he wanted to see them. Brandt cut her off before she could finish. "I don't care who you say you are. I've heard every story in the book. You people always have an excuse." He told her that if she didn't step back immediately, she would be placed under arrest for interfering with a police investigation. Vivian did not move. She looked at him with the kind of stillness that comes from 3 decades of sitting behind a federal bench and hearing every lie, every excuse, and every abuse of authority a courtroom can produce. She said, "I am a federal judge on the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals. You are unlawfully detaining 3 minor children without probable cause, and everything you are doing is being recorded, including by your own body camera." Brandt laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an uncomfortable chuckle, a full, open, dismissive laugh captured in high-definition audio by the body camera mounted on his own chest. A federal judge. "Right, and I'm the president." He told Vivian to sit down or he would put her in handcuffs too. The body camera recorded her expression. It did not change. Vivian asked for his badge number. He refused. She asked for his name. He refused. She asked for his supervisor's name. He told her she wasn't in charge here and to stop asking questions. Vivian reached into her purse, took out her phone, and dialed 911. She identified herself by name and title. She requested that a patrol supervisor be sent to the McDonald's on Broad Street immediately. She stated that an officer was unlawfully detaining her 3 minor grandchildren without probable cause and had used physical force against them. She then made a second call. This one was to her son, Colonel Terrence Hartwell, the children's father, a judge advocate general officer stationed at Fort Lee, 30 minutes south. She told him what was happening in 3 short sentences. He said he was on his way. Outside in the parking lot, Officer Saldano had already stepped away from the door. She stood near her patrol car and keyed her radio to dispatch. She asked them to run a name, Vivian Hartwell, federal judge, 4th Circuit Court of Appeals. The response came back in under 2 minutes. Dispatch confirmed the name, the title, the court, and the active appointment. Saldano lowered her radio and stood still in the parking lot. The color had drained from her face. She looked back through the glass doors at Brandt, still standing over the booth, and understood exactly what was about to happen. Sergeant Dale Compton, 48, pulled into the McDonald's parking lot 14 minutes after the first call. He had been with the department for 22 years and held a supervisory role over patrol officers in the district. Before he could reach the front door, Saldano stepped into his path. She spoke quickly and quietly. She told him the grandmother of the children inside had identified herself as a federal judge. She told him dispatch had confirmed it. Vivian Hartwell, 4th Circuit Court of Appeals. Active appointment. Compton stopped walking. He looked at Saldano for a long moment without speaking. Then he went inside. The body camera footage from Brandt's chest would later show Compton crossing the dining room in 4 seconds. He walked directly to Brandt and told him to step away from the family. Now, Brandt turned. He started to explain the situation, the call, the iPads, the children's refusal to cooperate. Compton cut him off. Step away from the family, officer. That is an order. Brandt's jaw tightened. He held his ground for a beat, then stepped back. But his body camera picked up what he said under his breath as he moved. Doesn't matter who she is. Those kids had no business with that kind of stuff. The microphone was 3 inches from his mouth. Every word was recorded. Compton approached Vivian, lowered his voice, and attempted to de-escalate. He returned the 3 iPads to the children. He apologized for the interaction and said the department would look into what had occurred. Vivian handed 1 iPad to Naomi, 1 to Isaiah, and 1 to Elijah. Then she looked at Compton and told him she was not accepting his apology. She said this was not a misunderstanding. This was racial profiling of 3 children. This was physical aggression against minors. Her youngest grandson's head had been slammed into a wall. Her oldest grandson had been patted down in a public restaurant, and every moment of it was going to be addressed formally, thoroughly, and publicly. Compton nodded but said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The first cell phone video hit social media before the Hartwell family had even left the parking lot. It was posted by a college student named Aisha Cohn, 20, who had been sitting 2 booths away eating a McFlurry when Brandt walked in. Her phone had been recording from the moment Brandt grabbed Elijah's wrist. The footage ran just over 9 minutes. It captured the grab, Isaiah's scream, Brandt telling a 7-year-old to shut his mouth, the moment Isaiah's head hit the wall, the pat-down of a 12-year-old boy, Vivian's arrival, her calm identification as a federal judge, and Brandt's laugh. That single video reached 2 million views within 48 hours. It was shared across every major platform. News outlets picked it up the same day. Local affiliates ran segments that evening. National networks followed by morning. The headline wrote itself. The McDonald's had 6 security cameras covering the dining room from different angles. All 6 were recording that Saturday afternoon. When attorneys for the Hartwell family filed a preservation request, the footage was subpoenaed within the week. It showed everything. Every angle confirmed what the cell phone videos had already made public. Brandt's body camera footage was requested through official channels the same day the story broke. The Richmond Metro Police Department did not release it. A spokesperson issued a statement saying the footage was part of an ongoing internal investigation and could not be made available at that time. Civil rights organizations called the delay a cover-up. Legal analysts pointed out that the department had no legal obligation to withhold the footage and every reason to suppress it. Online petitions demanding its release gathered over 300,000 signatures in 5 days. The pressure was building from every direction, and the department had no good options left. The footage existed. The public knew it existed. and no amount of delay was going to change what was on it. The Richmond Metro Police Department released its first public statement 48 hours after the videos went viral. It read like every department statement that had ever been written after a scandal broke too fast to contain. We take all allegations of misconduct seriously and are conducting a thorough and transparent review of the incident. We are committed to the highest standards of professionalism and community trust. No names were mentioned, no specifics were given, no accountability was acknowledged. The police union followed with its own statement the next day, calling Officer Brandt a dedicated veteran of the force and defending what it described as his right to investigate a reported crime. The union emphasized that Brandt had responded to a 911 call and followed standard procedures for handling a theft complaint. What the union did not address was what happened after he arrived. The 911 call itself was obtained through a public records request filed by a local journalist within 72 hours. The recording was 3 minutes and 14 seconds long. In it, Devin Osei's voice was hesitant, uncertain. He told the dispatcher that a customer had reported a possible theft involving children in the dining room. When the dispatcher asked what evidence there was, Devin paused. He said he wasn't sure. He said a customer had insisted. That was the entire basis for the call. No description of stolen property, no identified victim, no crime observed by any employee. Devin gave a full statement to the press the following week. He said he never believed the children had stolen anything. He said he had watched them come in with their grandmother, had taken their order himself, and had seen the iPads in their hands the entire time. He said he made the call because Karen Lipscomb had threatened to report him to corporate, and he was afraid of losing his job. Lipscomb was identified online within days. Her name, her photo, and her role in the 911 call became public knowledge through social media and news coverage. She issued no public comment. She deleted her social media accounts and did not respond to interview requests. Internal Affairs opened a formal investigation into Brandt's conduct. He was placed on paid administrative leave, which drew its own wave of outrage. Community groups held a rally outside the police department's central office. Civil rights organizations issued joint statements demanding Brandt's immediate termination and criminal prosecution. The department said nothing further. The silence only made it louder. Judge Vivian Hartwell understood the legal system better than almost anyone involved. She had spent 31 years presiding over federal cases, including civil rights matters, constitutional disputes, and cases involving law enforcement misconduct. She knew exactly what needed to happen, and she knew she could not be the one to do it. She recused herself from any proceedings connected to the incident and instead connected her son, Colonel Terrence Hartwell, with civil rights attorney Diane Achebe. Achebe was 51 years old and had spent 2 decades building a national reputation as one of the most effective litigators in police misconduct and civil rights violations against minors. She had argued cases before federal appellate courts, had secured multi-million-dollar settlements against 3 major metropolitan police departments, and had never lost a case involving documented use of force against a child. She reviewed the evidence in the Hartwell case and told the family it was among the most clear-cut she had ever seen. Achebe filed a federal civil rights lawsuit seeking $8.4 million in damages. The defendants named in the suit were Officer Russell Brandt personally, Officer Nina Saldano for failure to intervene and protect the children, the Richmond Metro Police Department for systemic failure to discipline and supervise, and the City of Richmond for institutional negligence. The complaint cited unlawful detention of 3 minor children without probable cause, excessive force against minors, racial profiling, emotional and psychological harm, assault on a minor resulting in physical injury, specifically the impact of Isaiah's head against the wall, and a documented pattern of ignored complaints that had enabled Brandt's behavior over more than a decade. All 3 children underwent independent psychological evaluations conducted by board-certified child psychologists. The results were consistent across all 3. Elijah, 12, had become withdrawn and refused to go to public places without a parent or grandparent present. Naomi, 10, experienced episodes of anxiety in the presence of authority figures, and had difficulty sleeping. Isaiah, 7, had developed a pronounced fear of uniformed officers. He flinched at the sound of sirens. He had recurring nightmares about a man in uniform taking things from his hands. He had asked his father more than once whether the police were going to come back for him. He was 7 years old. The discovery phase broke the case wide open. Achebe's team subpoenaed 14 years of internal records, and what came back was a paper trail of institutional failure, so thorough it read like a manual on how to protect bad officers. Brandt's file contained 31 formal complaints: excessive force, racially charged language, disproportionate targeting of Black and Latino residents. Each complaint had been reviewed by Internal Affairs. Each one had been dismissed. Dashcam footage from a 2021 traffic stop in which Brandt used a racial slur had been logged into the evidence system and then marked as corrupted. The file was never recovered. 2 officers who had previously reported Brandt's behavior were identified in the records. One was transferred to a less desirable precinct within 3 months. The other received his first negative performance review in 8 years, 6 weeks after raising concerns. Saldano's own records became part of the case. 3 months before the McDonald's incident, she had submitted a written report flagging Brandt's racially motivated behavior during calls they had responded to together. Her supervisor acknowledged receipt in an email. No action was taken. The department's Internal Affairs Division was subjected to an independent audit. Over the previous 10 years, 89% of racial profiling complaints had been dismissed without discipline. The rate for complaints filed by Black civilians against white officers was 91%. Expert witnesses testified on the psychological impact of police aggression on Black children. Dr. Lenora Graves, a child psychologist specializing in racial trauma, presented studies showing that aggressive law enforcement encounters during childhood produced lasting effects: heightened anxiety, chronic distrust, withdrawal from public spaces. She testified that all 3 Hartwell children exhibited those symptoms. Elijah had told his parents he didn't want to go outside without an adult anymore. He had stopped walking home from school with friends. He was 12 years old. Brandt was terminated. His law enforcement certification was permanently revoked. A federal grand jury indicted him on 3 counts of assault on a minor, unlawful detention, and deprivation of rights under color of law. He pleaded not guilty. His attorney argued he had responded to a legitimate 911 call and followed procedure. The trial lasted 9 days. The jury saw everything: body camera footage showing him grab a 12-year-old's wrist, shout at a 7-year-old, pry a child's fingers off an iPad, and shove that child into a wall. 6 angles of McDonald's security footage, cell phone videos from 4 customers, the 911 call that started it all, 3 minutes of a shift manager reporting a complaint he never believed, and Brandt's own words captured by his own equipment. Those kids had no business with that kind of stuff. The jury deliberated less than 5 hours. Guilty on all counts, 4 years federal prison. Saldano was fired for failure to intervene. 2 supervisors who dismissed prior complaints were demoted. The police chief was forced to resign after records showed he had personally signed off on dismissing 14 complaints against Brandt over 7 years, including the lost dashcam footage. The city of Richmond settled the civil lawsuit for the full $8.4 million. No negotiation, no reduced offer. The footage was indefensible, and every attorney in the city's legal office knew it. The Hartwell family used a portion of the settlement to establish the Hartwell Children's Justice Initiative, a nonprofit providing free legal representation and trauma counseling to children who had been subjected to police misconduct. Diane Achebe joined the advisory board. Within its first year, the initiative took on 37 cases across Virginia, most of them involving Black and Latino minors who had been stopped, searched, or detained without cause. Elijah continued therapy twice a week. Progress was slow, but it was real. He started walking to school again. He began talking to friends about what happened instead of going quiet when the subject came up. One evening after dinner, he told his grandmother he wanted to be a lawyer. Vivian looked at him for a long moment and told him he could be whatever he wanted to be. Isaiah still flinched at sirens. His therapist said the response was involuntary and would take time. He slept with a nightlight now and sometimes crawled into his father's bed after a bad dream. He was 7. Naomi wrote a letter to her school about what had happened in the McDonald's that Saturday afternoon. Her teacher helped her revise it. The local paper published it on the front page of the community section. She was 10 years old, and her words were clearer than most of the statements the police department had released. The McDonald's on Broad Street installed a small plaque near the corner booth. It read, "Every child deserves to feel safe." The Richmond Metro Police Department entered a federal consent decree requiring independent civilian oversight, quarterly bias audits, mandatory de-escalation training for all officers, and a zero-tolerance policy for complaints involving minors. Body camera compliance became subject to random monthly review with automatic suspension for violations. Brant walked into a McDonald's and saw 3 black children with iPads. He didn't see kids, he saw suspects. A federal judge saw her grandchildren crying, and a jury saw the truth. If you think this situation was bad,